The water shattered around her like liquid glass as Bryony surfaced, gasping for air that tasted of summer and reckless freedom. For one perfect moment, suspended between the cool embrace of the lake and the golden afternoon sun, she felt weightless, unburdened, alive in a way she hadn't felt since before her father's death, before the creditors came, before everything familiar crumbled to dust. She floated on her back, watching clouds drift across the endless blue, her dark hair fanning around her like ink spilled on silk. The old chemise she wore clung to her body, soaked through and entirely improper. But there was no one to see, no one to judge. This lake had been her sanctuary since childhood, hidden in the forest between her family's former estate and the neighboring lands. No one ever came here. That certainty lasted exactly 3 more heartbeats. The snap of a branch cut through the peaceful silence like a pistol shot. Bryony's body reacted before her mind caught up, legs kicking, arms flailing as she spun toward the shore. Her feet found the muddy bottom, water lapping at her collarbone, and she froze. A man stood at the edge of the lake. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in riding clothes that probably cost more than her family's remaining possessions combined. Dark hair swept back from a face that would have been striking if not for the absolute stillness of his expression. He held the reins of a midnight black horse, and he was staring directly at her with eyes the color of winter storms. Heat flooded Bryony's face despite the cool water. She sank lower, crossing her arms over her chest, painfully aware of how the wet fabric revealed everything, concealed nothing. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This is private property. His voice carried across the water, low and precise, with the cultured accent of old money and older titles. "You're trespassing." I know perfectly well whose property this is. The words escaped before she could stop them, sharp with a defensiveness born of humiliation. "I've been swimming in this lake since I was 7 years old." His eyebrow rose fractionally. "Have you indeed?" The Ashwell estate borders these woods. This lake was always considered common ground between the properties. My father and the old Duke had an understanding. A flicker of recognition crossed his features. "Ashwell. You're Cornelius Ashwell's daughter." It wasn't a question. Bryony's chin lifted despite her compromising position. "I am. Bryony Ashwell. And you must be the new Duke of Windmere. I understood you were in London for the season." I returned early. He made no move to leave, no gesture of gentlemanly discretion, simply stood there, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle beneath the water. "The old understanding, as you call it, ended when your father sold his estate to my predecessor 3 years ago. The lake is entirely within Windmere lands now. It has been since before my father's death." The words landed like stones in her chest. Of course her father had sold everything, including her childhood sanctuary, including even this small piece of peace. She should have known, should have checked before stripping down to her chemise and diving into water that no longer belonged to her family. "I apologize for the intrusion, Your Grace." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "If you would be so kind as to turn around, I'll collect my things and leave immediately." He didn't move. "Your father's funeral was 3 weeks ago. I sent condolences, which were received with gratitude." Though Bryony couldn't remember seeing his name among the letters. There had been so many, and so few of them genuine. Most came from creditors wearing sympathy like a mask. "You're staying at the Ashwell cottage, the one your father retained. For another month, yes, until the lease expires and the new owners take possession." She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice entirely. Another piece of her history, sold off to pay debts she hadn't even known existed until the solicitor read the will. "Your Grace, I really must insist that you turn around." In a moment, he released the horse's reins, taking a step closer to the water's edge. "Tell me, Miss Ashwell, what are your plans after the cottage lease expires? I fail to see how that's any concern of yours. Humor me." She should refuse, should demand he show some decency and allow her to preserve what little dignity remained. But something in his gaze held her there, treading water in her ruined chemise, answering questions she had no obligation to answer. "I'll seek a position. Governess, most likely, or companion to an elderly lady. My education was thorough, even if my circumstances are reduced." The words tasted like ash, like surrender. "I have references from before my father's troubles began." "And your brother?" "Gilbert, isn't it? I recall he was involved with some investment scheme that went rather spectacularly wrong." Bryony's hands clenched beneath the water. "My brother's business affairs are not a topic I discuss with strangers, particularly strangers who refuse to observe basic propriety." That earned her an almost smile, a slight softening at the corners of his severe mouth. "You're quite bold for a woman caught trespassing in her undergarments. And you're quite rude for a duke who supposedly received an education in gentlemanly behavior." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the gentle lap of water against the shore and the distant call of songbirds. Then, impossibly, he laughed. It was a rusty sound, as if he'd forgotten how, but genuine nonetheless. "Miss Ashwell, I find myself in need of assistance with a rather delicate matter." He reached into his coat pocket, withdrawing something that glinted gold in the sunlight. "How would you feel about a temporary arrangement that might benefit us both considerably? I would feel that you've lost your mind. I'm standing in a lake in nothing but a wet chemise. We've known each other for approximately 4 minutes, and you're proposing some sort of arrangement." "Not proposing." His eyes met hers, sharp and calculating, and strangely desperate beneath the aristocratic composure. "Offering. There's a difference." Bryony stared at him, water dripping from her hair, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with cold. Every rational instinct screamed at her to refuse, to demand he leave, to salvage what remained of her dignity and forget this encounter ever happened. But dignity didn't pay debts. Pride didn't secure futures. And the alternative? The slow grinding poverty of a governess's life, the dependence on strangers' goodwill, the absolute erasure of everything she'd once been. That waited for her regardless. "What kind of arrangement?" The Duke of Windermere smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to something far more dangerous. "The kind that requires you to attend a house party at Windermere Hall, as my guest, and, for all appearances, as my potential bride." The world tilted sideways. Bryony forgot the cold water, forgot her state of undress, and forgot everything except the impossibility of what he'd just said. "You cannot be serious. I assure you, Miss Ashwell, I have never been more serious about anything in my life." He tucked the gold object, a pocket watch, she now realized, back into his coat. "But perhaps we should continue this conversation once you're properly attired. I'll wait by the old oak. You have 5 minutes to decide whether you want to hear more, or spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been." He turned then, finally showing her the courtesy of his back, and walked toward a massive oak tree some 50 yards distant. His horse followed without command, loyal as a shadow. Bryony stood frozen in the water, her mind racing faster than her shivering body could process. A duke, a house party, a pretend courtship. She had 5 minutes to decide her future. 4 minutes and 53 seconds later, she emerged from the lake, wrung out her hair, pulled her worn dress over her damp chemise, and walked toward the oak tree. She didn't look back. The Duke of Windermere stood with his back against the ancient oak, arms crossed, watching her approach with an expression that revealed nothing of his thoughts. Up close, away from the distorting shimmer of water, he was even more imposing than she'd first realized. At least 6 feet tall, with the lean, powerful build of a man who spent time on horseback rather than in drawing rooms. His face was all sharp angles and controlled intensity. Handsome in a way that felt almost aggressive, he was also, she noticed, younger than she'd expected. Perhaps 30, possibly a year or two less. The weight he carried in his bearing had aged him in her initial assessment. "You came?" He didn't sound surprised. "I'm here to listen." That's not the same as agreeing to anything. Bryony stopped several feet away, painfully aware of her dripping hair and the damp patches spreading through her faded muslin dress. "You mentioned an arrangement. Explain." "Direct. I appreciate that." He pushed away from the tree, beginning to pace with the restless energy of a caged predator. "My grandmother, the Dowager Duchess, has decided that my period of mourning is concluded. She's arranged a house party at Windermere Hall next week. 20 guests, carefully selected, all designed to push me toward one particular outcome. Marriage. To Lady Venetia Ashby, specifically. The Earl of Pemberton's daughter. Beautiful, wealthy, connected. Everything a duchess should be on paper." His voice flattened. "She's also calculating, cold, and views me as nothing more than a title to be acquired. My grandmother doesn't care. She wants an heir secured, the bloodline continued, duty fulfilled." Bryony recognized the bitterness in his tone. She'd heard it in her own voice often enough. "And you don't want to marry Lady Venetia." "I don't want to marry anyone. Not yet. Not while I'm still." He stopped, his jaw tight. "Not while I'm still managing my father's death and the weight of expectations I never wanted." "Then simply tell your grandmother no." "You don't know my grandmother." A humorless smile crossed his face. "She is not a woman who accepts refusal. She spent the past 3 months maneuvering me into this position. The house party is her final gambit. By the end of the week, she expects an engagement announcement. Lady Venetia expects the same. Half of London society expects the same. What does any of this have to do with me?" He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "Everything, Miss Ashwell. Because 3 hours ago, before I stumbled upon you in my lake, I had no way out of this trap. No plausible excuse to reject Lady Venetia without causing a scandal that would follow me for years. But now I have you. You don't have me. Not yet." He stepped toward her, close enough that she could smell leather and sandalwood and something darker beneath. "But I could. If you agreed to attend the house party as my guest, presented as a woman I'm considering for courtship, Lady Venetia would have competition. My grandmother would be forced to delay her plans, and I would have time to breathe, to grieve, to figure out what I actually want from my life, without being pushed into a marriage I'll regret." Bryony's mind raced through the implications. "You want me to pretend to be your romantic interest, a woman of no fortune, no connections, no position in society. Your grandmother would see through it instantly." "Would she?" His eyebrow rose. "You're the daughter of a gentleman. Your family's name is old and respected, even if the money is gone. You were educated alongside the daughters of earls and barons. You know how to conduct yourself in society, because you were raised in it, before circumstances changed." "Circumstances," she laughed, the sound brittle. "That's a polite word for financial ruin and social exile." "It's also an opportunity," he pressed on, relentless. "Think about it, Miss Ashwell. 1 week at Windermere Hall. Beautiful gowns, fine food, the chance to move in society again, even temporarily. At the end, when the house party concludes, we'll stage a mutual decision to remain friends. Your reputation stays intact. You leave with connections, references, introductions to families who might employ a woman of your breeding and education, and I gain the time I need. And if your grandmother investigates my background, if she discovers how far the Ashwell family has truly fallen, then we tell the truth, that you're a gentlewoman facing reduced circumstances through no fault of your own. It's sympathetic, not scandalous. Half the gentry in England has a cousin or niece in similar situations. Bryony turned away, walking a few steps toward the lake, her thoughts churning like storm water. It was mad. The entire proposition was utterly, completely mad. She'd be walking into a viper's nest of aristocratic politics and family drama, armed with nothing but borrowed dresses and a fabricated connection to a man she'd met less than an hour ago. But the alternative was the cottage's empty rooms, the dwindling funds, and the slow death of every dream she'd ever held. Gilbert's schemes had left them with nothing. Her father's debts had swallowed what remained. In a month, she'd be homeless, seeking employment as a glorified servant in some stranger's household. At least this way, she'd have a chance. A small one, fragile as spun glass, but a chance nonetheless. I have conditions. She turned back to face him. Something like respect flickered in his expression. Name them. First, I want complete honesty about what I'm walking into. Every family secret, every social landmine, and every enemy I might encounter. I won't be ambushed by information you chose to withhold. Agreed. Second, I want my expenses covered entirely. Gowns, accessories, transportation, everything. I won't pretend to be a viable Duchess candidate while wearing patches and last decade's fashions. You'll have an unlimited account at any modiste you choose. Third, she advanced toward him, holding his gaze with steel she hadn't known she possessed. When this ends, I want letters of introduction, real ones, from you and from any connections I make during the house party. Recommendations that will open doors to respectable positions. I won't go back to nothing. I won't survive this performance, only to end up worse than before. The Duke studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his careful mask. You negotiate like a woman who's had to fight for everything she has. I am a woman who's had to fight for everything she has. Bryony didn't flinch. Do we have a deal, Your Grace? He extended his hand. The gesture was strange, almost masculine, the kind of agreement sealed between business partners rather than a gentleman and a lady. But then, nothing about this situation followed the normal rules. We have a deal, Miss Ashwell. His grip was warm and firm, calloused in ways that suggested he did more than simply ride his horses. The house party begins in 4 days. I'll send a carriage for you tomorrow morning to begin preparations. You'll need to meet my sister, Cosima. She'll help you with the finer details of our supposed courtship. Your sister knows about this scheme? My sister is the one who originally suggested I find an alternative to Lady Venetia. She'll be your ally. For the first time, something like warmth entered his voice. Cosima sees marriage as something that should involve actual affection, a radical notion in our family. Bryony released his hand, suddenly aware of how long she'd held it. And your grandmother? The dowager? The warmth vanished. Will be your greatest obstacle. She's formidable, perceptive, and absolutely convinced she knows what's best for this family. She'll try to break you down, find your weaknesses, and force you to reveal the arrangement. She sounds delightful. She's terrifying. He said it without humor. But if you can survive her scrutiny, the rest will be manageable. Comforting. He retrieved his horse's reins, preparing to mount. One more thing, Miss Ashwell. During the house party, you should call me Hadrian. Formality between supposed romantic interests would appear suspicious. Hadrian. She tested the name, feeling its weight on her tongue. And you may call me Bryony, I suppose, though the circumstances of our first meeting suggest we've already dispensed with most formalities. His gaze dropped briefly to her still damp dress, and she thought she caught the ghost of a smile. "I'll endeavor to forget the lake entirely." "See that you do." She watched him swing into the saddle with easy grace. "Tomorrow morning, then. I'll be ready." "I don't doubt it." He looked down at her from horseback, silhouetted against the afternoon sun like something out of a painting. "Welcome to Windermere, Miss Ashwell. Try not to drown before you arrive." He rode away before she could respond, disappearing into the trees with the speed of a man escaping something. Bryony stood alone in the clearing, lake water still dripping from her hair, and wondered what exactly she'd just agreed to. The carriage that arrived at the cottage the next morning was a study in restrained opulence. Black lacquer with silver trim, drawn by 4 matched gray horses, attended by a coachman and 2 footmen in immaculate Windermere livery. It looked almost absurd, parked in the overgrown lane outside her modest home. Bryony had spent the night alternating between anxious preparation and outright panic. She'd packed her few decent dresses, knowing they would be inadequate. She'd written a letter to Gilbert explaining her absence, omitting any details that might tempt him toward another scheme. She'd walked through the cottage one final time, touching walls that had sheltered her childhood summers, saying goodbye to spaces she might never see again. Now she stood on the front step, a single traveling case at her feet, watching the footman approach with an expression of studied neutrality. "Miss Ashwell." At her nod, he collected her case with the same care he might show a duchess's luggage. "His Grace sends his compliments and hopes your journey will be comfortable." The carriage interior was even more impressive than its exterior. Velvet cushions in deep burgundy, curtains of cream silk, a small basket containing fruits, pastries, and a sealed note with her name written in bold, masculine script. She opened the note as the carriage began to move. "Miss Ashwell, your first test begins immediately. My sister Cosima will meet you upon arrival. Listen to everything she tells you. Trust nothing my grandmother says. And for your own sake, eat something before you reach the house. Windermere dinners are elaborate performances, and you'll need your strength." The journey took 3 hours, winding through countryside that grew increasingly dramatic as they traveled north. Rolling hills gave way to dense forests, which parted eventually to reveal glimpses of something massive on the horizon. Windermere Hall emerged from the landscape like a crown. Bryony's breath caught as the full scope of the estate came into view. The house was enormous, a sprawling edifice of honey-colored stone that seemed to glow in the afternoon light. Towers and turrets punctuated the roofline, and endless rows of windows glittered like watching eyes. Formal gardens spread before the main entrance, geometric patterns of hedge and flower that must have required an army of groundskeepers to maintain. This was where she would spend the next week, pretending to belong, pretending she might actually become mistress of all this impossible grandeur. The carriage pulled around the curved drive and stopped before the main entrance. Before the footman could reach her door, it flew open from the outside, and a young woman with tumbling dark curls and sparkling brown eyes thrust her head inside. "You're here, finally. I've been watching from the window for ages." She grabbed Bryony's hands and practically pulled her from the carriage. "I'm Cosima. Hadrian's told me everything." "Well, probably not everything. He's terrible at explaining. But enough. You're absolutely perfect. I knew it the moment I saw the carriage approaching. Come inside, quickly, before grandmother spots us from her lair." Bryony found herself swept through the massive front doors and into an entrance hall that could have contained her entire cottage several times over. Marble floors stretched in every direction. A grand staircase curved upward toward distant galleries. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors observed her passage with what felt like active disapproval. "Don't mind them," Cosima noticed her gaze. "The Sterlings have always been a gloomy lot, Hadrian's the worst of them, actually, though he's improved slightly since yesterday. Something about finding a mysterious woman swimming in his lake. Her eyes sparkled with mischief. I need every detail of that story, by the way. He's being infuriatingly vague. There's not much to tell. I was trespassing. He caught me. Now I'm here. Yes, but the trespassing was in your undergarments, wasn't it? Cosima grinned at Bryony's furious blush. I knew it. Hadrian turned absolutely scarlet when I pressed him about it. I haven't seen him blush since we were children. You're already doing wonders for him. They climbed the grand staircase, turned down a long corridor lined with more disapproving portraits, and finally stopped before a door painted soft green. Your rooms. Cosima pushed the door open with a flourish. The Jade Suite. I insisted. It has the best light and the prettiest view, and it's far enough from grandmother's apartments that she can't spy on you easily. Bryony stepped inside and felt her legs threaten to buckle. The suite was larger than any room she'd ever occupied. A sitting room with silk-covered furniture in shades of green and gold. An attached bedroom dominated by a canopied bed draped in embroidered fabric. A dressing room lined with mirrors and empty wardrobes waiting to be filled. Windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, overlooking gardens that seemed to extend forever. The modiste is coming this afternoon. Cosima settled onto a chaise, clearly prepared for an extended conversation. Madame Laurent, she's the best in 3 counties, and she owes our family several favors. You'll have a complete wardrobe by tomorrow evening. Ball gowns, day dresses, riding habits if you ride, everything you need. This is too much. Bryony's voice came out strange, overwhelmed. I can't accept all of this. You can, and you will. It's the arrangement. Cosima's voice softened, losing some of its bubbling energy. Bryony. May I call you Bryony? My brother explained the terms you negotiated. I want you to know that I think you were absolutely right to demand what you did. And I want you to know that I'm on your side. You don't even know me. I know my brother, which is better. Cosima curled her legs beneath her, looking suddenly younger, more vulnerable. Hadrian hasn't been himself since our father died 8 months ago. He just withdrew. Into duty, into work, into this shell of responsibility that doesn't let anything through. Grandmother's been using his grief against him, pushing Lady Venetia as the solution to everything. But Venetia is, she shuddered delicately. She's dreadful, actually. Cold as ice and twice as sharp. She'd make him miserable. And you think I won't? I think you're real. Cosima's brown eyes met hers directly. I've watched you for 5 minutes, and I already know more about who you are than I've learned about Venetia in 5 years of acquaintance. You're not pretending to be something you're not. You're not calculating every word. You're just here. Present. And Hadrian needs that desperately, even if he doesn't know it yet. Bryony sank onto the edge of a chair, the weight of the past 24 hours finally catching up with her. You understand this is temporary. A performance. When the house party ends, I'll leave with my references, and your brother will be free to do whatever he wants with his life. This isn't a romance. Of course not. Cosima's smile held secrets. Now, tell me about yourself. Everything grandmother might use against you, so we can prepare defenses. I want to know about your family, your education, your circumstances, and every detail that might come up during the week. They talked for hours. Bryony found herself revealing more than she'd intended, drawn out by Cosima's genuine warmth and clever questions. She spoke of her father's illness and death, of Gilbert's disastrous investments, of the slow unraveling of everything she'd known. She spoke of the lake where she'd swum as a child, not knowing it had been sold along with everything else. She spoke of her fears for the future, her determination to build something new from the wreckage. By the time a maid appeared to announce the modista's arrival, Bryony felt raw, exposed, and strangely lighter. One more thing. Cosima paused at the door, her expression serious for the first time. Grandmother will receive you tomorrow morning. It's tradition. She meets every houseguest personally before the party officially begins. Your brother warned me she was formidable. Formidable is kind. Cosima's hand found hers, squeezing briefly. She's going to test you, Bryony. Push you, provoke you, and try to make you reveal weaknesses she can exploit. But I've seen how you carry yourself. You don't break easily. No. Bryony squared her shoulders. I don't. Good. Cosima disappeared into the hallway, leaving Bryony alone in her impossible jade rooms, with a wardrobe to build and a grandmother to prepare for. Through the window, she could see the garden stretching toward distant woods, and somewhere beyond them, the lake where everything had changed. Tomorrow, she would face the Dowager Duchess. Tomorrow, she would discover whether her courage was enough to survive this gilded world. Tonight, she would sleep in silk sheets for the first time in her life, and try not to dream of drowning. Morning arrived with pale gold sunlight streaming through the jade silk curtains, and the quiet efficiency of servants Bryony never heard enter. Fresh flowers appeared on the vanity. A breakfast tray materialized on the sitting room table, and laid across the chaise was a morning dress of soft dove gray with pearl buttons, more elegant than anything she'd ever owned. A young maid with copper hair and freckled cheeks helped her dress, introducing herself as Pippa and chattering cheerfully about the household. Lady Cosima says you're to eat well, miss. The Dowager doesn't take breakfast with guests, so you've time to settle your nerves. Pippa arranged Bryony's dark hair into a simple but becoming style. She also says to remember that the Dowager respects courage more than cleverness, whatever that means. Bryony suspected she knew exactly what it meant. At precisely 10 o'clock, a footman appeared to escort her through a maze of corridors to the Dowager's private apartments. Each step felt heavier than the last, each doorway another threshold between the life she'd known and whatever waited ahead. The Dowager Duchess of Windermere received visitors in a sitting room that felt less like a parlor and more like a throne room. Tall windows draped in burgundy velvet, walls lined with portraits of sterling ancestors. And at the center of it all, positioned before the fireplace like a queen holding court, sat the woman herself. She was not what Bryony expected. The Dowager was small, almost delicate, with silver hair swept into an elaborate arrangement, and skin like aged parchment stretched over elegant bones. She wore black silk that rustled when she moved, and diamonds that caught the light with every breath. Her eyes were the same winter storm gray as her grandson's, but sharper, more assessing, honed by decades of navigating aristocratic politics. Miss Ashwell. The Dowager did not rise or offer her hand. Approach. Bryony crossed the room, acutely aware of the older woman's gaze cataloging every detail, her posture, her dress, the way she moved, the steadiness of her hands. She curtsied with the precision her mother had drilled into her since childhood. Your Grace, thank you for receiving me. I receive all house guests personally. It is tradition. The Dowager gestured to a chair positioned directly across from her own, close enough for interrogation. Sit. We have much to discuss. Bryony sat, folding her hands in her lap, and waited. My grandson tells me you are an old acquaintance, that your families were neighbors before your father's unfortunate financial difficulties. The Dowager's tone made clear what she thought of that explanation. He tells me you encountered each other recently and renewed your connection, that he invited you to the house party as his personal guest. That is accurate, Your Grace. Is it? The Dowager leaned forward slightly. Because I have made inquiries, Miss Ashwell, Your father died 3 weeks ago, leaving debts that consumed what little remained of the Ashwell estate. Your brother Gilbert is a known associate of gamblers and schemers. Your family has not moved in society for nearly 4 years. And yet, here you are, installed in my finest guest suite, wearing a dress that was clearly not purchased with your own funds. Each fact landed like a blow, but Bryony kept her expression steady. Everything you've said is true, Your Grace. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise. Something flickered in the dowager's eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Or interest. Then explain to me why my grandson, the Duke of Windermere, one of the most eligible men in England, has suddenly developed an interest in an impoverished gentlewoman with no fortune, no connections, and no prospects beyond whatever charity she can attract. Bryony's pulse quickened, but her voice emerged calm. Perhaps because I don't want anything from him. Everyone wants something from a duke. I want stability, security, the chance to build a life that doesn't depend on someone else's whims or my brother's latest scheme. Bryony met the dowager's gaze directly. His Grace has been kind enough to offer me an opportunity to make connections that might help me secure a respectable position after the house party. I accepted because the alternative was poverty and dependence. But I am not pursuing him for his title or his fortune. I'm not pursuing him at all. The dowager studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You're either remarkably honest or remarkably clever. I haven't decided which. I've found that honesty requires less effort to maintain. A practical philosophy. The dowager rose, moving to the window with the deliberate grace of someone who had commanded rooms for decades. My grandson is grieving. He has been since his father's death, though he hides it behind duty and distance. He is also stubborn, proud, and determined to resist what is obviously best for his future. You mean Lady Venetia Ashby? The dowager turned, one silver eyebrow raised. You know of her. Cosima mentioned her, and His Grace explained that you've been encouraging the match. Encouraging. The word came out sharp. I have been attempting to save my grandson from himself. Hadrian would lock himself in his study until he's 40, if given the choice. Lady Venetia is everything a duchess should be. Wealthy, connected, trained from birth for the role. She would manage his household, produce heirs, and navigate society on his behalf. He would barely need to participate. Is that what you want for him? A wife who requires nothing of him? The question escaped before Bryony could stop it, and she immediately wished it back. But the dowager's expression shifted, something cracking beneath the imperious surface. What I want, the dowager said quietly, is for him to live. Not merely exist, but live. His father understood the difference. Edmund married for love despite my objections, and though I disapproved, I cannot deny that he was happy. Truly happy, until the illness took him. She turned back to the window. Hadrian has closed himself off from that possibility. He sees marriage as duty, connection as weakness. Lady Venetia would not challenge that. She would enable it. Bryony remained silent, uncertain how to respond. You, Miss Ashwell, are an unknown variable. The dowager faced her again, her gaze piercing. You have no pedigree to recommend you, no fortune to tempt him, nothing but whatever qualities exist beneath that composed exterior. You are either exactly what you appear to be, a desperate woman grasping at opportunity, or you are something else entirely. Something that might actually reach him. I'm not trying to reach him, Your Grace. This is a temporary arrangement, a week's performance, nothing more. So you say. The dowager moved toward her, stopping close enough that Bryony could smell lavender and something sharper beneath. One more thing. If you hurt him, if you manipulate his grief for your own advantage, if you give him hope only to crush it, I will ensure you never recover. I have spent 50 years building influence in this society. I can use it to protect, or I can use it to destroy. I understand, Your Grace. Do you? The Dowager's eyes bored into hers. I wonder. You carry yourself like a woman who has already lost everything. But there are always deeper losses waiting. Remember that. She moved toward the door, and Bryony understood the audience was concluded, but the Dowager paused at the threshold, her hand on the frame. Dinner is at 8. Lady Venetia and her family arrived this afternoon, along with most of the other guests. I suggest you use the intervening hours to prepare yourself. A thin smile crossed her lined face. The performance begins tonight. She swept out, leaving Bryony alone in the throne room with her racing heart and the unsettling realization that she'd been given both a warning and something else entirely. Something that felt almost like permission. Bryony spent the afternoon in a whirlwind of preparation. Madame Laurent arrived with an army of assistants and an avalanche of fabric, conducting fittings with the precision of a military campaign. Gowns materialized as if by magic. Evening dresses in sapphire and gold, day dresses in soft pastels, a riding habit in deep green that made her eyes glow. Through it all, Cosima kept up a running commentary on the guests who would be arriving. Lord and Lady Pemberton are Venetia's parents. He's harmless, mostly interested in his hunting dogs. She's the dangerous one, nearly as calculating as her daughter. They've been positioning Venetia for a ducal match since she was in the schoolroom. And the others? The Thornberry sisters, Margot and Sylvie. Old family friends, mostly harmless gossips. Sir Rupert Crane and his wife, political connections grandmother cultivates. The Belmont family, including their son Marcus, who's been sniffing around Venetia himself, though she won't give him the time of day, now that a duke is in her sights. Cosima ticked them off on her fingers. And various assorted cousins, minor nobility, and social climbers filling out the numbers. A viper's nest. An accurate description. Cosima grinned. But you'll have allies. Me, obviously. And Hadrian, though he's terrible at showing support. He tends to stand in corners, looking severe, rather than actually talking to people. As if summoned by his name, a knock sounded at the door. Hadrian entered without waiting for permission, stopping short when he saw the chaos of fabrics and accessories scattered across every surface. I see Madame Laurent has begun her work. Nearly finished, Your Grace. The modiste didn't look up from her pinning. Miss Ashwell will be the most elegantly dressed woman at your house party. I guarantee it. She could wear a flour sack and still outshine Lady Venetia, Cosima muttered, earning a sharp look from her brother. A word, Miss Ashwell? When you're able. Bryony extracted herself from the fitting, following Hadrian into the corridor. He led her through a series of hallways she didn't recognize, finally stopping before a door that opened into a library. Her breath caught. The room was 2 stories tall, lined floor to ceiling with books, leather-bound volumes in every color, organized on polished mahogany shelves. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by leather chairs positioned for reading. The scent of old paper and wood polish wrapped around her like an embrace. My father's sanctuary. Hadrian moved to a window, his back to her. He spent more time here than anywhere else, reading philosophy, writing letters, escaping grandmother's schemes. It's beautiful. It's lonely. He turned, and she saw something raw in his expression, quickly suppressed. I wanted to thank you for this morning. Cosima told me you faced grandmother without flinching. That's rare. She told me she would destroy me if I hurt you. It was remarkably direct. That sounds like her. He almost smiled. She means it, you know. She's not given to empty threats. I gathered. Bryony moved deeper into the library, trailing her fingers along the spines. She also said something else, that you haven't looked this alive in months. She seemed to think our arrangement had something to do with it. Silence stretched between them. When she turned, Hadrian was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. My grandmother sees what she wants to see. Does she? Bryony held his gaze. Because I think she sees quite clearly. She knows this is a performance, even if she can't prove it. And she's watching to see whether there's anything real beneath the act. Is there? The question hung in the air, dangerous and charged. There's practicality, Bryony said carefully. Mutual benefit. Two people using circumstance to solve immediate problems. That's what we agreed to. Yes. He approached her, stopping near enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes. That's what we agreed to. Neither of them moved. Neither spoke. The library's silence wrapped around them, intimate as a shared secret. You should know something about Lady Venetia. Hadrian's voice dropped lower. She's not merely ambitious. She's vindictive. When she discovers your competition, real or perceived, she'll attempt to destroy you. Not physically, but socially. Whisper campaigns, strategic cruelty, isolation from anyone who might support you. I've faced worse than social maneuvering. Have you? He studied her face. I'm beginning to believe you have. Bryony thought of the past 3 years, the slow erosion of everything she'd known, the friends who vanished when the money did, the whispers that followed her family's fall, the creditors who'd spoken to her as though she were something found on the bottom of a shoe. Poverty strips away illusions, she said. It shows you exactly who people are. Lady Venetia can whisper all she likes. I've survived worse than whispers. A flicker of emotion crossed his features. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred damage. My father used to say that suffering either destroys character or reveals it. He reached past her, pulling a book from the shelf. He was quoting someone. I can never remember who. He handed her the volume. It was slim, bound in blue leather, the title stamped in gold. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, his favorite. He said it was the only philosophy that mattered. Everything else was commentary. Bryony turned the book over in her hands, feeling the weight of its significance. You're giving this to me? Lending, for the duration of your stay. His eyes met hers, and she saw something vulnerable beneath the aristocratic mask. He would have liked you, I think. You have the same quality he admired, the refusal to be diminished by circumstance. I don't know what to say. Say you'll read it. A ghost of warmth entered his voice, and that you'll still be standing at the end of the week, no matter what Venetia throws at you. Bryony pressed the book against her chest, feeling its leather binding like armor. I'll still be standing. I promise you that. They stood there in the quiet library, surrounded by his father's books and the weight of unspoken things. For the first time since arriving at Windmere, Bryony wondered whether the performance might be more complicated than she'd anticipated. Then the dinner gong sounded, echoing through the house, and the moment shattered. Tonight begins everything. Hadrian's mask slipped back into place. Lady Venetia will assess you immediately. Grandmother will watch your every move. The other guests will form opinions within minutes of meeting you. Then I suppose I should go make myself presentable. Bryony moved toward the door, then paused. Hadrian? He looked up, surprised by the use of his name. Thank you. For the book. For the warning. For all of it. Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify. Don't thank me yet. The performance hasn't even started. The sapphire gown was a weapon. Bryony understood that the moment Pippa finished fastening the last button, and she turned to face the mirror. Madame Laurent had outdone herself. The dress clung to her figure before cascading in elegant folds to the floor, its color deep enough to be almost black in shadow, but burning blue where the candlelight caught it. Small crystals had been sewn into the bodice, catching light with every breath, and the neckline showed more of her collarbone than she'd ever displayed in public. "You look like a duchess," Pippa breathed. "I look like someone pretending to be a duchess." But even Bryony couldn't deny the transformation. For one night, at least, she would fit into this world. Cosima collected her at the top of the grand staircase, stunning herself in rose silk that complemented her dark coloring perfectly. "Remember," Cosima whispered as they descended, "Lady Venetia will be watching for weakness. Don't give her any, and stay near Hadrian when you can. His attention is your shield." The drawing room was already crowded when they entered. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, casting golden light across silk gowns and polished jackets. Laughter and conversation created a wall of sound that Bryony had to push through simply by appearing. She felt the moment attention shifted to her. Heads turned. Whispers began. Fans rose to cover mouths, sharing observations she couldn't hear, but could easily imagine. Then Hadrian appeared at her side, offering his arm with the smooth precision of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. "Breathe," he murmured, guiding her into the room. "Remember, you belong here tonight." She didn't, but she lifted her chin and smiled as if she did. The introductions blurred together. Lady this, Lord that, the Earl of somewhere. Cosima stayed close, whispering helpful context. "That's the Marchioness of Hertford. Terrifying but fair. Those are the Sinclair twins. Harmless flirts. Avoid Lord Pembry. He smells of mothballs and talks only of his hunting dogs." And then, inevitably, Lady Venetia appeared. She was even more beautiful than Bryony had expected, her blonde hair gleaming in the candlelight, her rose silk gown cut in the absolute height of fashion. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place. "Your Grace." Venetia curtsied to Hadrian with practiced grace, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "How wonderful to see you again. It's been an age since the Pemberton Ball." "Lady Venetia." Hadrian's tone was perfectly neutral. "May I present Miss Bryony Ashwell? She's a guest for the house party." Those green eyes turned to Bryony, evaluating, dismissing, and reconsidering in the space of a heartbeat. "Miss Ashwell, I don't believe we've met." The emphasis on Miss was subtle but deliberate. "Are you connected to the Hampshire Ashwells, or perhaps the Norfolk branch?" "Neither, I'm afraid. My family's estate was in Derbyshire. The Ashwell family is quite small now." "Derbyshire, how provincial." Venetia's smile never wavered. "And what brings you to Windermere? Surely such a grand party must be rather overwhelming for someone from such a modest situation." "Lady Venetia." Hadrian's voice cut through the sweetness like a blade. "Miss Ashwell is here as my personal guest. I trust she'll be treated with appropriate courtesy." The temperature between them dropped several degrees. Venetia's smile tightened, and Bryony saw something ugly flash behind those pretty eyes. "Of course, Your Grace. I meant no offense." She turned back to Bryony, and her expression arranged itself into something that wanted to look friendly. "We must talk more later, Miss Ashwell. I'm sure you have such fascinating stories about country life." She glided away before Bryony could respond, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and implied insults. "She's declared war." Cosima appeared at Bryony's elbow, her voice low. "That comment about your situation was deliberate. She's marking territory." "Let her mark." Bryony watched Venetia's white-clad figure disappear into a cluster of admirers. "I've been dismissed by better." Dinner was an elaborate performance of 12 courses, with Bryony seated strategically between a harmless elderly baron and Marcus Belmont, the young man Cosima had mentioned as Venetia's spurned suitor. He proved surprisingly pleasant company, more interested in discussing books than gossip, and Bryony found herself relaxing slightly as the meal progressed. From across the table, she caught Hadrian watching her. He looked away immediately when their eyes met, but she'd seen something in his expression. Approval, perhaps, or concern. After dinner, the party moved to the ballroom. Bryony hadn't been in a ballroom since before her father's troubles. The Windmere Ballroom was magnificent, all gilded mirrors and towering windows, with an orchestra already playing something elegant. Couples began to form for the first dance, and she found herself standing alone at the edge of the floor, suddenly uncertain. Then Hadrian was beside her, offering his hand. The first dance of the evening. Traditionally, the host opens with his most honored guest. I'm hardly your most honored guest. Tonight you are. His eyes held hers with unsettling intensity. May I have this dance, Miss Ashwell? She placed her hand in his, and they took the floor. The waltz began, and everything else faded. His hand at her waist, firm and guiding, her palm pressed against his, the music swelling around them like a tide. She was aware of watching eyes, of Venetia's fixed smile, of the dowager's assessing gaze from her position by the wall. But mostly, she was aware of him. You're thinking too hard, Hadrian murmured as they turned. Stop counting and simply move. I'm not counting. You're doing something. Your shoulders are rigid as boards. Perhaps because the entire room is staring at us and waiting for me to make a mistake. Then disappoint them? His grip tightened slightly, pulling her closer than was strictly proper. Show them what I already know. That you belong here as much as anyone. Something shifted in her chest. She stopped calculating, stopped worrying, simply let the music guide her. They moved together with surprising grace, turning and sweeping across the floor, and she felt almost weightless. Better, he said quietly. Much better. The dance ended too soon. He released her with a formal bow, and the spell broke. But something lingered, a warmth in her chest, an awareness of how his hand had felt at her waist. The next hour passed in a blur of dances and conversation. Marcus Belmont claimed her for a quadrille. Sir Rupert discussed parliamentary matters she barely understood. The Thornberry sisters cornered her with questions about fashion that she answered as vaguely as possible. Through it all, she felt Hadrian's awareness tracking her across the room. Whenever she looked up, he was there, watching from whatever conversation he was supposedly engaged in. And whenever she looked up, Venetia was watching too. The confrontation came during a break between dances. Bryony had stepped onto the terrace for air, the cool night a relief after the ballroom's heat. She was alone for precisely 30 seconds before Venetia emerged from the shadows. Miss Ashwell, how fortunate. I was hoping for a private word. Bryony turned, her spine straightening instinctively. Lady Venetia, are you enjoying the evening? Immensely. Venetia drew nearer, and the sweetness in her voice curdled into something sharper. Though I confess I'm curious about your sudden appearance. The Duke has never mentioned you before. No one in society has heard of you. And yet here you are, installed as his honored guest, dancing with him before the entire company. His Grace and I are old acquaintances. Our families were neighbors. Were they? How convenient that this old acquaintance should resurface just as his grandmother is arranging a very advantageous match. Venetia's eyes glittered in the moonlight. It almost seems calculated. If you're suggesting, I'm not suggesting anything. Venetia cut her off, all pretense of friendliness abandoned. I'm observing. And what I observe is a desperate woman from a ruined family grasping at an opportunity far above her station. You may have charmed your way into this house party, Miss Ashwell, but make no mistake. The Duke of Windmere will marry appropriately. He will marry me." Bryony's hands clenched at her sides, but her voice emerged steady. "That seems presumptuous, given that His Grace hasn't proposed." "He will." Venetia smiled, and it was the coldest expression Bryony had ever seen. "His grandmother has ensured it. All the pieces are in place. You're nothing but a temporary distraction, and when this week ends, you'll return to whatever hovel you crawled out of, and everyone will forget you ever existed." The words cut deeper than they should have, because they echoed every fear Bryony had been trying to suppress. "You don't know anything about me. I know enough." Venetia turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Miss Ashwell? That gown is lovely. It's a pity it can't disguise what you really are." She swept back into the ballroom, leaving Bryony alone on the terrace with the night pressing against her skin and something burning behind her eyes. She was still standing there when footsteps approached from behind. "I saw her follow you out." Hadrian's voice was quiet, concerned. "What did she say?" "Nothing I didn't already know." Bryony didn't turn around. "She reminded me of my place, of what I am, of what this arrangement really means. What it means is that you've survived the first test." He moved to stand beside her at the railing, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You danced beautifully. You charmed Marcus Belmont. You handled grandmother's scrutiny without breaking. Whatever Venetia said, it doesn't change any of that. It doesn't change the truth either." She finally looked at him, and something in her expression made his jaw tighten. "I am temporary. This is borrowed. When the week ends, I go back to being nobody, and she'll still be here. She'll still win." "No." The word came out fierce, unexpected. "She won't." "Hadrian." "She won't," he repeated, and suddenly his hand was cupping her face, gentle but insistent, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You are not nobody. You never were. And whatever happens at the end of this week, whatever Lady Venetia believes, I promise you this: she will not win." The intensity in his voice stole her breath. They stood there, his hand warm against her cheek, the moon watching from above, and Bryony felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "You shouldn't make promises you can't keep," she whispered. "I never do." The ballroom doors opened, spilling light and music across the terrace. They separated quickly, but not before several pairs of eyes registered their position. "The last dance is about to begin." Hadrian's voice had returned to formal neutrality, but something in his eyes remained. "Will you honor me, Miss Ashwell?" She took his hand, and together they walked back into the light. But as they passed through the doorway, Bryony saw Venetia watching from across the room, and the fury in those green eyes promised that the real battle was only beginning. The days that followed the ball established a pattern Bryony learned to navigate with increasing skill. Morning walks in the gardens with Cosima, afternoon activities designed to showcase the guests' various accomplishments, archery, painting, cards, evening dinners that lasted hours, followed by music, or dancing, or charades. Through it all, Venetia watched. She never confronted Bryony directly again, but her presence was constant, suffocating. A whispered comment to another guest that fell silent when Bryony approached. A sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. Strategic positioning that ensured she was always near Hadrian, always visible, always reminding everyone of the match that was supposed to happen. On the fourth day, the house party ventured to the village for a fair. Bryony found herself separated from Cosima in the crowd, wandering between stalls selling ribbons and sweetmeats, momentarily free from the weight of observation. She was examining a display of pressed flowers when Venetia appeared beside her. "Miss Ashwell, how charming to find you admiring such modest wares." Venetia's voice dripped with false warmth. "I suppose it reminds you of home." Bryony set down the flower she'd been holding. Lady Venetia, are you enjoying the fair? Immensely. Though I confess these rustic entertainments grow tedious after a while. Venetia picked up a ribbon, examined it with distaste, and dropped it again. I prefer London's diversions. The opera, the theater, the endless social engagements that come with being a duchess. You speak as though the position is already yours. Isn't it? Venetia's smile sharpened. Oh, I know you've been playing your part admirably. The mysterious guest, the object of the Duke's sudden fascination. It's quite the performance, but we both know how this ends. Do we? Of course. Venetia leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial murmur. The Dowager has already arranged everything. The announcement will come at the closing ball. Hadrian will propose. I will accept. And by this time next year, I'll be the Duchess of Windermere. It's been planned for months. Bryony's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. Plans change. Not these plans. Something ugly flickered behind Venetia's pretty features. You see, Miss Ashwell, I've made inquiries of my own. I know about your brother's debts. I know about the creditors circling your family's remaining assets. I know that your cottage lease expires in 3 weeks, and after that, you'll have nothing. Nowhere to go. No one to help you. Each word landed like a blow, precise and devastating. What's your point? My point is that you're desperate. Venetia's voice hardened. And desperate women make mistakes. I've already mentioned to several guests that I'm concerned about you. That your circumstances might be driving you to pursue the Duke inappropriately. That perhaps his kindness is being exploited by someone with ulterior motives. That's a lie. Is it? Venetia's eyebrow rose. A penniless woman from a ruined family, suddenly appearing at a house party, wearing gowns she couldn't possibly afford, dancing with the Duke before the entire company. It doesn't take much imagination to see how that looks. Bryony's hands trembled at her sides. Hadrian knows the truth. He invited me here. Hadrian is grieving and confused. He's clinging to anyone who seems different from the expectations he's drowning in. But grief fades, Miss Ashwell. Confusion clears. And when it does, he'll see exactly what you are. Venetia's smile turned poisonous. A temporary distraction, a charity case, a woman so far beneath him that this entire charade is almost embarrassing to witness. The words cut deeper, because they echoed every fear Bryony had been trying to suppress since the moment she'd agreed to this arrangement. You don't know anything about what I am. I know everything that matters. Venetia adjusted her gloves with deliberate casualness. I know that when this week ends, you'll return to your crumbling cottage and your worthless brother and your future of servitude. And I know that I'll still be here. I'll always be here. Because this is my world, Miss Ashwell. You're just visiting. She swept away before Bryony could respond, disappearing into the fair's crowds with the practiced grace of someone who had already won. Bryony stood frozen among the ribbon stalls and flower displays, her chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to tears. Everything Venetia had said was true. Every cutting observation reflected the reality Bryony had been trying to ignore. This was temporary, borrowed, a fantasy that would evaporate the moment the house party ended. She was still standing there when Cosima found her. Bryony, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Nothing. The word came out hollow. I just need some air. You're already outside. Then I need different air. Bryony pulled away from Cosima's concerned touch. Please, I just need a moment alone. She walked away before Cosima could stop her, leaving the fair behind, heading toward the woods that bordered the village. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stay there, couldn't keep performing, couldn't pretend for another moment that any of this was real. Venetia's words echoed in her mind, relentless and cruel. A temporary distraction, a charity case, a woman so far beneath him. The worst part was that she couldn't argue, because Venetia was right. She was all of those things. And no amount of sapphire gowns or moonlit dances could change the fundamental truth of what she was. Nobody. She didn't know how long she walked. The woods swallowed her, cool and green, and mercifully silent. Eventually, she found herself at a small clearing where a stream burbled over smooth stones, and she sank onto a fallen log, her head in her hands. This was madness. The entire arrangement was madness. She should leave tonight, before the closing ball, before Venetia's whisper campaign could do real damage. Return to the cottage, pack what little remained, and begin the governess search in earnest. At least that future was honest. At least it didn't require pretending to be something she could never become. "You're difficult to find when you don't want to be found." Bryony's head snapped up. Hadrian stood at the edge of the clearing, still in his fair clothes, slightly out of breath, as though he'd been searching for some time. "How did you know where I was?" "Cosima said you fled toward the woods. I know these paths." He approached slowly, as though she were a wild creature who might bolt. "She also said you seemed upset. What happened?" "Nothing happened." Bryony. Her name on his lips, soft and concerned, nearly undid her. "Tell me." "Lady Venetia happened." The words escaped before she could stop them. "She reminded me of certain truths I'd been trying to forget, that's all." Hadrian's jaw tightened. "What truths?" "That this is temporary. That I'm a charity case playing dress-up in a world I don't belong to. That when the week ends, I go back to nothing, while she gets everything she's been planning for." "That's not. It is true." Bryony stood, needing to move, needing distance. "Every word of it. I don't have a fortune, Hadrian. I don't have connections or position or any of the things that matter in your world. I have a crumbling cottage, a brother who can't stay out of debt, and 3 weeks before, I have to start begging strangers for employment. You won't have to beg anyone for anything. You can't promise that." Her voice cracked. "You can't promise anything. We agreed to a performance, and performances end. That's what they do." He crossed the clearing in 3 strides, closing the distance between them until she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, and the barely controlled emotion beneath his composed surface. "What if I don't want it to end?" The words hung between them, dangerous and impossible. "You don't mean that." "I've never meant anything more." His hands found her shoulders, gentle but insistent. "These past days, watching you navigate grandmother's tests, watching you refuse to be diminished by Venetia's cruelty, watching you exist in my world as though you were born to it, I've felt more alive than I have in months. Years, perhaps. Hadrian. My father spent 20 years grieving my mother. 20 years alone because he couldn't imagine anyone else in her place. I thought I understood that. I thought shutting myself away from connection was honoring his memory somehow. His grip tightened. But he wouldn't want that for me. He would want me to find what he found. Something real. Someone real. Bryony's pulse thundered in her ears. I'm not. You're everything. The word came out fierce, desperate. You're brave and honest, and you refuse to be anyone other than who you are. You challenged me from the moment we met, standing in that lake in your wet chemise, negotiating terms like you were the one with all the power. Despite everything, a laugh escaped her. I was terrified. You didn't show it. His hand rose to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. You never show it. You just keep standing, keep fighting, keep being exactly who you are. And I think I've been falling for you since the moment you told me I was rude for a duke who supposedly received an education. That was rather bold of me. It was perfect. His eyes searched hers, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. Tell me I'm not alone in this. Tell me you feel something too. She should deny it, should protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak waiting at the end of this fairy tale, should be practical and sensible and all the things that survival demanded. Instead, she told the truth. I feel everything. Her voice emerged barely above a whisper. Too much. It terrifies me. Good. He pulled her closer, eliminating the last distance between them. Terror means it matters. Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was desperate and searching and honest in a way that words could never be. His mouth claimed hers, and she responded with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his jacket, pulling him closer, closer, as though she could absorb him through sheer force of wanting. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. Come back to the house with me, he murmured. We'll tell grandmother together. We'll figure out how to make this work. Your grandmother will never accept me. Then I'll change her mind, or I'll proceed without her blessing. His eyes met hers, fierce with determination. I'm done being controlled by expectations, Bryony. I want to choose, and I choose you. The words wrapped around her heart like armor. For one perfect moment, she let herself believe. Let herself imagine a future where this was real, where she could be enough, where love actually conquered the practical realities of fortune and position. Then voices echoed through the trees. Your Grace? Your Grace, are you there? They sprang apart as a servant crashed through the undergrowth, his expression urgent. Your Grace, you must return to the hall immediately. The Dowager has called an emergency gathering. All guests are required in the drawing room. Hadrian's hand found Bryony's, squeezing briefly. What's happened? I don't know, Your Grace. Only that Her Grace seemed most agitated. The servant's eyes flicked to Bryony, widening slightly at her presence. She specifically requested that Miss Ashwell attend as well. Ice settled in Bryony's stomach. Me, specifically? Yes, miss. By name. Hadrian's grip tightened on her hand. Whatever this is, we face it together. But as they followed the servant back through the woods, Bryony couldn't shake the feeling that the ground beneath her feet was about to crumble entirely. The drawing room was silent when they entered. Every guest had assembled, arranged in careful clusters that somehow left a wide space in the center of the room. The Dowager sat in her customary position by the fireplace, her expression carved from stone. Lady Venetia stood nearby, and though her face wore appropriate concern, her eyes gleamed with barely concealed triumph. Bryony's stomach dropped. Ah, Miss Ashwell, how good of you to join us. The Dowager's voice could have frozen water. I apologize for interrupting whatever woodland excursion you were enjoying with my grandson. The implication hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Several guests exchanged meaningful glances. The Thornberry sisters whispered behind their fans. Grandmother. Hadrian stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Bryony. What is this about? This is about truth, Hadrian. Something that seems to be in short supply at this house party. The Dowager withdrew a letter from her lap, holding it up for all to see. I received correspondence this afternoon from a Mr. Felix Swinton. The name means nothing to me, but apparently he's quite well acquainted with Miss Ashwell's brother. They've conducted business together, it seems. Business of a rather unsavory nature. Bryony's blood ran cold. Felix Swinton, one of Gilbert's gambling associates, a man who'd been circling their family's remaining debts like a vulture. What kind of business? Lady Pemberton asked, her voice eager. The kind that involves debts, forgeries and schemes designed to extract money from anyone foolish enough to trust them. The Dowager opened the letter. According to Mr. Swinton, Gilbert Ashwell owes considerable sums to various creditors. Sums that, conveniently, might be resolved if his sister were to secure a wealthy husband. That's absurd. Hadrian's voice cracked like a whip. Whatever debts her brother may have are not Miss Ashwell's doing. Are they not? The Dowager's eyes fixed on Bryony. Mr. Swinton seems to believe Miss Ashwell was quite aware of her brother's scheme, that in fact, she volunteered for this arrangement specifically to clear their family debts. That's a lie. Bryony stepped forward, her heart pounding. I never spoke to Felix Swinton in my life. I don't know what he's told you, but he tells me you were desperate. The Dowager cut her off. That your family's situation was so dire, you would do anything to secure fortune and position. That you've been manipulating my grandson's grief to insinuate yourself into his affections. Grandmother, enough. Hadrian's voice shook with barely controlled fury. I invited Miss Ashwell here. I pursued her, not the other way around. Whatever lies this Swinton person has concocted, are they lies? The Dowager stood, her small frame somehow dominating the entire room. Miss Ashwell, look me in the eye and tell me that your brother has debts. That you didn't agree to this arrangement hoping it might solve your family's financial problems. That you haven't been performing a role designed to secure exactly the outcome you now face. Bryony opened her mouth to deny it, but the words caught in her throat. Because it wasn't entirely a lie. She had agreed partly because of the opportunity it offered. She had hoped for connections that might secure her future. The arrangement had always been transactional on some level. Her hesitation was answer enough. I thought so. The Dowager's voice held no triumph, only weary disappointment. Lady Venetia warned me that something was amiss. I should have listened sooner. Venetia's expression remained perfectly sympathetic, but her eyes glittered with victory. Grandmother, this changes nothing. Hadrian moved to stand beside Bryony. Whatever the circumstances of our introduction, my feelings are real. Her character is real. A letter from some opportunist doesn't erase what I've come to know. What you've come to know? The Dowager laughed bitterly. You've known her for less than a week. You're grieving, vulnerable, and desperate for something to feel other than pain. She saw that and exploited it. That's not, Bryony started. Isn't it? The Dowager turned to face her directly. Tell me honestly, Miss Ashwell, when you agreed to come here, was it because you genuinely cared for my grandson? Or was it because you saw an opportunity to escape your circumstances? The room held its breath. Bryony looked at Hadrian, saw the desperate hope in his eyes, and felt something shatter inside her. Because she couldn't lie. Not to him. Not about this. It was both, she whispered. At first, it was the opportunity. But then, you developed feelings. The Dowager's voice dripped with scorn. How convenient. How perfectly timed. It's the truth. Truth? The Dowager gestured at the assembled guests. The truth is that you're a fortune hunter in a borrowed gown, and everyone in this room can see it. The truth is that my grandson deserves better than a schemer who uses grief as a gateway to wealth. The truth, Miss Ashwell, is that you don't belong here. You never did. The words landed like physical blows. Bryony felt them strike bone, felt something inside her crumple and collapse. I'll leave tonight. Her voice emerged, hollow, unfamiliar. You won't have to endure my presence any longer. Bryony, no. Hadrian grabbed her arm. Don't let her. She's right. Bryony pulled free, unable to meet his eyes. About all of it. I should never have come here. I should never have agreed to any of this. Please, I'm sorry. She finally looked at him, and the pain in his expression nearly destroyed her. I'm so sorry. She walked out of the drawing room with as much dignity as she could manage, leaving behind the whispers and the judgment and the man she'd been foolish enough to love. In her room, she packed with trembling hands. The beautiful gowns stayed. The jewelry stayed. She took only what she'd arrived with, plus the Marcus Aurelius that Hadrian had given her. She couldn't leave that behind. Even now, she couldn't leave that behind. The carriage was waiting within the hour. The dowager had arranged it with brutal efficiency. As Bryony climbed inside, she allowed herself one final look at Windermere Hall. Somewhere in that massive house, Hadrian was fighting battles she couldn't help him win. Somewhere, Venetia was celebrating her victory. Somewhere, the life Bryony had briefly glimpsed was closing its doors forever. The carriage pulled away, and she didn't look back again. The cottage felt smaller than ever. Bryony stood in the doorway, her single traveling case at her feet, and tried to remember why she'd ever thought this place was home. The walls pressed close. The furniture sagged with decades of use. Everything smelled of dust and disappointment. Gilbert found her there an hour later, still standing in the doorway, unable to make herself move further inside. "Bryony? What happened? I thought you were at some grand house party." It ended early. She finally stepped inside, setting down her case. "Did you send Felix Swinton to write letters about me?" Gilbert's expression flickered with guilt. "I don't know what you're— Don't lie to me." Her voice emerged flat, exhausted. "The dowager received a letter detailing your debts, your schemes, your plans to use me to secure fortune. It destroyed everything." "I was trying to help." Gilbert ran his hands through his hair. "Swinton said if you married rich, our problems would disappear. I thought maybe if the Duke knew how desperate things were, he'd feel obligated to— To what? Marry me out of pity?" Bryony laughed, the sound brittle. "You absolute fool. You ruined the one chance I had at something real." "Real?" Gilbert's brow furrowed. "I thought you said it was just an arrangement, a performance." It was. She sank into a chair, suddenly unable to stand. "Until it wasn't." Gilbert was silent for a long moment. "You actually care about him?" "It doesn't matter now." Bryony stared at the empty fireplace. "It's over. The dowager believes I'm a fortune hunter. The other guests will spread that story throughout society. Any hope I had of securing decent employment is gone. I'm sorry." Gilbert knelt beside her chair, and for once, his expression held genuine remorse. "I didn't think— You never do." The next 3 days passed in a blur of nothing. Bryony went through the motions of existing. She helped prepare meals she couldn't taste. She read books she couldn't remember. She lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment with Hadrian until the memories felt worn thin. On the 4th day, someone knocked at the cottage door. Bryony expected a creditor, perhaps one of Gilbert's associates come to collect. Instead, she found Cosima standing on the step, travel-worn and breathless, her dark curls escaping from beneath her bonnet. "You're here." Cosima pushed past her without waiting for invitation. "Thank God. I've been searching for hours. Your directions were terrible. How did you—" Bryony shut the door, her mind struggling to catch up. "Why are you here?" "To talk sense into you, obviously." Cosima turned, and her eyes were fierce. "You left. You just left without fighting, without letting Hadrian defend you, without even saying a proper goodbye." There was nothing to fight for. The dowager was right. I am everything she accused me of. "You're not." Cosima grabbed her hands. "Listen to me. Swinton's letter was a scheme. He owed money to Venetia's family. Did you know that? The Pembertons bought his debts, specifically, so they could use him to destroy you." Shock rippled through her. "What?" "Venetia arranged the whole thing. She saw how Hadrian looked at you, how different he'd become since you arrived, and she panicked. She paid Swinton to write that letter, timed to arrive at the worst possible moment. Cosima's grip tightened. It was sabotage, Bryony. Deliberate, calculated sabotage. Even if that's true, it doesn't change what I admitted. I did agree to the arrangement partly for practical reasons. I did hope it might solve my problems. So what? Cosima's voice rose with frustration. You were honest about your circumstances from the beginning. You negotiated terms openly. You never pretended to be something you weren't. That's not fortune hunting. It is survival. The Dowager doesn't see it that way. The Dowager doesn't know everything. Cosima released her hands, pacing the small room. She's been wrong before. She was wrong about my mother. Did you know that? She opposed the match for years, and she's wrong about you. It doesn't matter. It matters to Hadrian. Cosima stopped, her expression softening. He's been impossible since you left. Locked in his study, refusing to see anyone, barely eating. He told grandmother he won't marry Venetia regardless of what happened. He said he'd rather remain unmarried forever than settle for someone he doesn't love. Bryony's heart clenched. He said that. He shouted it, actually, during a rather spectacular argument that the entire household overheard. A small smile crossed Cosima's face. I've never seen him that passionate about anything. You did that. You woke something in him that we all thought died with our father. I can't go back, Bryony's voice broke. I can't face that room full of people who think I'm a schemer, who believe I manipulated him. You don't have to face any of them. Cosima took her hands again. Just him. Come back and talk to him. Let him make his own choice with all the facts. That's all I'm asking. Bryony looked around the cottage that had become her prison, at the peeling wallpaper and the sagging furniture, and the future of slow diminishment that waited if she stayed. Then she looked at Cosima, who'd traveled hours to find her, who believed in her despite everything, who was offering her a chance she didn't deserve. One conversation, she said finally. That's all. Cosima's face split into a brilliant smile. That's all you'll need. The carriage arrived at Windmere as the sun began to set, painting the honey-colored stone in shades of gold and amber. Most of the house party guests had departed, Cosima explained. Only the family remained, along with a few servants preparing the house for its return to normalcy. He's in the library. Cosima squeezed her hand as they entered the great hall. He's barely left it since you went. I'll make sure grandmother doesn't interfere. Bryony climbed the familiar stairs, walked the familiar corridors, and stopped before the library door. Her hand trembled as she raised it to knock. Come in. His voice, muffled through the wood, still sent warmth flooding through her chest. She pushed open the door. Hadrian stood by the window, silhouetted against the dying light. He looked terrible. Dark shadows under his eyes. His usually immaculate clothing rumpled. His hair disordered, as though he'd been running his hands through it for days. He turned, and the expression that crossed his face when he saw her nearly brought her to her knees. Bryony. Her name emerged like a prayer. You came back. Cosima convinced me. She stepped into the room, suddenly uncertain. She told me about Venetia, about Swinton, about what really happened. None of that matters. He crossed to her in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching her. What matters is that you're here. What matters is that you gave me a chance to say what I should have said before you left. Hadrian, let me finish. His eyes held hers with desperate intensity. When grandmother confronted you, when she accused you of scheming, I should have defended you more strongly. I should have told everyone in that room exactly what you mean to me. Instead, I let you walk away thinking I believed her accusations. You tried to stop me. Not hard enough. His jaw tightened. I've spent the past 4 days berating myself for that failure, for letting Venetia's manipulation succeed, for being too shocked to fight when fighting was what you needed. There was nothing you could have done. The Dowager had made up her mind. Grandmother's mind has been changed. His expression changed subtly. I told her everything. The arrangement, the circumstances of our meeting, the way my feelings evolved from practicality to something much deeper. I told her that I love you, and that I intend to marry you if you'll have me, and that no amount of opposition will alter that decision. Bryony's breath caught. You told her you love me? I told everyone. A ghost of a smile crossed his tired face. Rather loudly, as it happens. Cosima says the servants will be gossiping about it for years. And the dowager? Was furious, then resigned, then, surprisingly, almost impressed. He stepped closer, finally allowing himself to touch her, his hands cupping her face with devastating gentleness. She said, "You must be extraordinary to provoke such feeling in me." She said perhaps she'd underestimated what you were. She threatened to destroy me. She threatens everyone. It's her way of showing concern. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. She's waiting in her sitting room. She wants to speak with you again, if you're willing. Why? Because she realized something. When you left, when you walked away with nothing but dignity and the clothes on your back, when you refused to fight for yourself even though you could have, she saw what I'd seen all along, that you're not a schemer or a fortune hunter. You're just a woman who was dealt an unfair hand and played it with more grace than anyone could expect. Tears pricked Bryony's eyes. I was going to take the book, the Marcus Aurelius. I couldn't leave it behind. Of course you couldn't. His voice cracked with emotion. It was a gift, from my heart to yours. You were supposed to keep it. Hadrian, I love you. The words came out fierce and certain. I love your courage and your honesty and the way you refuse to be diminished by circumstance. I love that you challenged me from the moment we met. I love that you make me want to be present, to feel, to live instead of merely existing. I love you too. She finally let herself say it, let the truth flow free. I've been trying not to, but I do. Completely. Terrifyingly. He kissed her then, and it was different from the desperate kiss in the forest. This was tender, searching, full of promise rather than urgency. When they broke apart, his forehead resting against hers, she felt something settle into place inside her chest. Marry me. His voice was rough with emotion. Not because of arrangement or convenience or social maneuvering. Marry me because I can't imagine facing another day without you beside me. Your grandmother will never fully approve. My grandmother will come around. She always does when she realizes she's wrong. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes burning with intensity. Say yes, Bryony. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice. She thought of everything she'd be gaining. A home, security, a place in a world she'd once belonged to. But more than that, more than any practical consideration, she'd be gaining him. The man who'd seen her at her most vulnerable and offered opportunity instead of judgment. The man who'd fought for her even when she'd stopped fighting for herself. Yes. The word emerged, steady and sure. Yes. I'll marry you. His smile transformed his entire face, washing away the exhaustion and pain, leaving only joy. He kissed her again, and she felt the future opening before them like a door thrown wide. They went to the dowager together, hand in hand. The older woman received them in her sitting room, her expression unreadable. But when Bryony curtsied, the dowager raised a hand to stop her. No, you're to be my grandson's wife. We're family now, or will be soon enough. Her eyes, so like Hadrian's, studied Bryony's face. I owe you an apology, Miss Ashwell. I allowed myself to be manipulated by people with their own agendas. You were trying to protect your grandson, your Grace. I was trying to control him. There's a difference. The dowager's lips quirked. Edmund, my son, Hadrian's father. He always said I interfered too much. That love couldn't be managed like a household account. I didn't listen then. Perhaps it's time I started. Does this mean you approve? Hadrian asked, his grip on Bryony's hand tightening. It means I won't oppose you. The dowager's gaze met Bryony's directly. Lady Venetia has been sent away. The story of her deception will circulate through society by week's end. Your reputation, Miss Ashwell, will be restored. Thank you, Your Grace. Don't thank me. Prove me right. The dowager stood, moving toward them with the deliberate grace that characterized all her movements. Prove that love is worth more than strategy. Prove that my grandson, choose wisely. She paused before Bryony, and something almost warm flickered in her ancient eyes. Prove that I was wrong about you. Bryony lifted her chin. I intend to, Your Grace. Every day for the rest of my life. The dowager nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both dismissal and blessing. Then welcome to the family, Bryony Ashwell. Try not to make me regret it. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, in the small chapel on the Windmere estate where generations of Sterlings had been married. Bryony wore a gown of ivory silk that Madame Laurent declared her finest work. Cosima served as her attendant, radiant in pale gold. The dowager sat in the front pew, her expression stoic, but her eyes suspiciously bright when Bryony walked down the aisle. And Hadrian waited at the altar, looking at her like she was everything he'd ever wanted and never dared to hope for. The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional, and the kiss that sealed their union anything but. I love you, he murmured against her lips, the words for her alone. Duchess of Windmere, I love you too. She smiled up at him. Even if you were terribly rude to me at our first meeting. You were trespassing. You were staring. You were beautiful. His eyes softened. You still are. The wedding breakfast was an elaborate affair, with guests from across the county come to witness the unlikely match. Some attended out of curiosity, others out of genuine goodwill. A few, Bryony suspected, came simply to witness the scandal made respectable. She didn't care. She had Hadrian's hand in hers, Cosima's laughter ringing across the room, and a future she'd never dared imagine. Even Gilbert had cleaned himself up for the occasion, his gambling debts paid off by Hadrian as a wedding gift, though Bryony had insisted her brother earn back the money through honest work. He'd taken a position managing one of the smaller Windmere properties, finally having something real to build instead of schemes to chase. As the celebration continued, Hadrian pulled her away from the crowds, leading her through the house and out the back entrance. Where are we going? You'll see. They walked through the gardens, past the formal hedges and manicured lawns, into the woods that bordered the estate. The path was familiar now, and when they emerged at the lake, Bryony's breath caught. Lanterns hung from the surrounding trees, casting golden light across the water. A blanket had been spread on the bank, with champagne cooling in a silver bucket and cushions arranged for comfort. Our beginning, Hadrian said softly. I thought we should celebrate it properly. Bryony turned to face him, overwhelmed by the gesture. You remembered. How could I forget? A beautiful woman in a wet chemise, telling me I was rude. He smiled, and it reached his eyes completely. It was the moment my life changed, even if I didn't know it then. They settled on the blanket, champagne glasses in hand, watching the stars emerge above the lake. The water was still, reflecting the lantern light like scattered jewels. I never thanked you properly, Bryony said after a comfortable silence. For what? For seeing me. Not my circumstances or my family's debts or the opportunity I represented. Just me. She turned to look at him. Everyone else saw a problem to be solved, or an obstacle to be removed. You saw a person. I saw someone extraordinary pretending to be ordinary. He set down his champagne, taking her hands in his. And I knew, even then, that I wanted to spend the rest of my life convincing you of the truth. What truth? That you belong, here, with me, in this life. His eyes held hers, earnest and loving. You're not borrowing anything anymore, Bryony. This is yours, all of it. She kissed him then, long and deep, and the lanterns reflected off the water like captured stars. When they finally broke apart, she was laughing. What? I was just thinking. She nestled against his shoulder, exactly as she had that first night in the opera box, except everything was different now. If I hadn't trespassed that day, none of this would have happened. Then I'm grateful for your criminal tendencies. They're not criminal. The lake was common ground when I was a child. It still is. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Everything I have is yours now, including the lake where it all began. They stayed there until the stars wheeled overhead and the lanterns burned low, talking about everything and nothing, making plans for a future that stretched before them like an endless summer. Finally, as the moon rose high above the water, Hadrian stood and offered his hand. Duchess, shall we return to our guests? Bryony looked at the lake one final time, the place where she'd been at her most vulnerable, where a stranger had offered her an impossible choice, where her entire life had changed in the space of a single conversation. Then she took her husband's hand and let him lead her home. 1 year later, the anniversary arrived with perfect summer weather. Bryony woke in the great bedroom of Windermere Hall, sunlight streaming through tall windows, her husband's arm draped across her waist. She smiled, watching him sleep, marveling at how peaceful he looked now, compared to the guarded, grieving man she'd met in the woods. You're staring, he murmured, without opening his eyes. I'm observing. There's a difference. He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest, and pulled her closer. Happy anniversary. Happy anniversary. They spent the morning in comfortable domesticity, breaking their fast together, reviewing correspondence, discussing estate business as equal partners. The Dowager had mellowed considerably over the year, especially after Bryony's careful management of several household crises that proved her capable of the Duchess role. In the afternoon, Hadrian disappeared on mysterious business, returning just before sunset with a conspiratorial smile. Come with me. He led her to the lake. The lanterns had returned, strung through the trees, exactly as they'd been on their wedding night. The blanket was spread on the bank, champagne cooling in the same silver bucket. But something new waited beside it, a small wooden box, tied with ribbon. What's this? Open it. Inside was a key. Old, ornate, clearly antique. Bryony looked at him, confused. I don't understand. It's the key to the cottage. Hadrian's voice was soft. Your family's cottage. The one where I sent Cosima to find you. I purchased it from the new owners last month. You bought back my cottage? It's yours now. Legally, permanently. Whatever happens, you'll always have a place that belongs only to you. He cupped her face, his eyes intense. You told me once that you wanted security, that you never wanted to depend on anyone else's whims. I wanted to give you that. Tears spilled down Bryony's cheeks. Hadrian, it's not charity. It's not control. It's just love. He smiled, brushing away her tears with his thumbs. Though I hope you'll continue living at Windermere with your terribly rude husband. She laughed through her tears. I suppose I could be persuaded. I'll spend the rest of my life persuading you. He kissed her forehead. Every day, if necessary. They settled on the blanket as darkness fell, the lake shimmering with reflected lantern light. Bryony leaned against Hadrian's shoulder, the key clutched in her hand, her heart so full it ached. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" she asked. "I believe I accused you of trespassing. After that, you said you had an arrangement to propose, something that might benefit us both considerably." I may have underestimated how considerably. His arm tightened around her. I thought I was buying time to grieve. Instead, I found a reason to live. Do you ever regret it? Choosing scandal over suitability? Never. The word was instant, absolute. My grandmother still makes pointed comments about proper protocols. Society still whispers about our unconventional beginning. But every morning, I wake up beside you, and I know I made the only choice that mattered. Bryony smiled, tilting her face up for a kiss. Even though I was trespassing? Especially because you were trespassing. He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, with the practiced passion of a year's worth of love. You trespassed into my lake, my house, and my heart. I've never been happier to catch a criminal. I told you it wasn't criminal. It was fate. He pulled back, his expression softening into something profound. The best thing that ever happened to me wore a wet chemise and negotiated terms like she was the one with all the power. I learned from the best. You learned from yourself. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. That's what I love most about you. No one taught you how to be brave. You just are. They stayed at the lake until the stars emerged, until the champagne was empty and the lanterns burned low, until the night wrapped around them like a blessing. When they finally returned to the house, walking hand in hand through the moonlit gardens, Bryony looked back one last time at the water that had changed everything. Some journeys began with careful planning, with maps and provisions and clear destinations. Theirs had begun with reckless swimming and borrowed dresses and a proposition too absurd to accept. She wouldn't have had it any other way. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that defies expectation, in characters who fight for happiness despite impossible odds, in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming, and I am grateful for every moment you spend with these characters. Do you have a favorite line or scene? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what keeps you listening, and what kinds of stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you'd like more stories with emotional depth and genuine character growth. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is.